Hi
Hi,
there.
everyone.
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, thanks for
Appreciate
kicking us
it.
off today. I'll hand it over to you guys and pop back in at the end.
All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thanks to everybody for joining, and thank you, Colleen, for participating in today's fireside chat.
No problem. I'm just trying to figure out this virtual background thing. I think it's
Yeah,
starting right now, but I'm in
yeah. I was
it.
having some trouble with the brand innovator background, so I've got my TVision background.
Okay, I
There.
think I got it. I think I got it.
All right. There
Cool.
you go. Right on. So why don't we start off by kind of introducing ourselves to the people out there. So I guess, Colleen, tell me a little bit about your background and about what you're doing now over at ThirdLove.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you, Mike, and talk about this really important and interesting topic. So I've been in marketing pretty much my whole career in some way, shape, or form for about 15 years. I started in corporate communications and PR. So all the storytelling, I like to say I'm a storyteller in the B2B space. And then a little bit after that, about 7 years into my career, I actually switched into brand marketing and brand management. So I spent about a little over 6 years at the Coca-Cola company working on big brands like Vitamin Water and Powerade and big campaigns like Olympic campaigns, to starting a smaller brand called Fruit Water that was kind of like bootstrappy even for by Coke standards. And then I pivoted into the retail world and I went to Bonobo. So whole new universe of end-to-end consumer engagement, driving sales through e-commerce, retail, fast pace, and really kind of balancing both the product commitment on products that fit you in an exceptional way, but also laddering into an emotional way of how you fit in the world. And then in my most recent incarnation, I am at ThirdLove, which is the women's intimates and essentials company, founded on bras that have the perfect fit, but now we're actually expanding into other categories with our recent launch of loungewear. And here I have a really cool role. I actually oversee what's called integrated marketing, and that includes both the brand team and the brand marketing and strategy side of the business, go to marketing strategy, et cetera, but also the growth team, which includes your more traditional performance marketing, as well as our brand media buys. And what's really cool about my role is that it's usually not done this way at other companies. You usually have growth team and the brand team, and sometimes they're siloed. And this is really trying to bring that together to think about how can you think holistically about filling your funnel, whether that be from brand awareness and familiarity and consideration, all the way through to new customer acquisition, and ensuring that there's a coherent strategy and expression of your brand across both of these. And what's interesting is because my background, I have touched on brand. I actually led the creative team for a little bit at Bonobos as well. Like bringing that all together at ThirdLove has been really exciting for me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That sounds like a super cool role, being able to combine both those sides of marketing. And your background, you have a really interesting background from really classic CPG to kind of emerging direct to consumer brands now. And today's conversation is all about the future of TV. Be interesting to hear kind of, I guess, how you see TV playing a role at the traditional CPG companies compared to the DTC companies. Where you're at now. How does that differ? How does TV play a role as far as a channel at those two different types of companies?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you asked that. And, it's funny because I haven't been at one of those big CPG companies, I guess, since 2017 is when I
Mhm.
left. Um, and I'm sure that it's changing and evolving as consumers have different touch points. But like the primary difference is kind of how these businesses touch consumers, right? Like I always like to say that when I worked at Coke, our conversion metrics were like converting a customer was getting someone to walk into a 7-Eleven and buy a Powerade. And we're going to measure that through Nielsen, et cetera. And maybe you have that interaction at that point of sale with that customer, but from a media buy perspective, out of home, that kind of things become more important. But when you're thinking about TV and touching customers from like those larger CPGs where there's a number of steps before the consumer buys, it's all about how are you keeping your brand top of mind so that you are there and have that share of mind when that person has that occasion to purchase your product.
Right.
Um, Now, so you're thinking that KPIs are more like bigger brand awareness. So brand awareness, aided and unaided, favorability, purchase intent, values. Are you lining up with the key brand identifiers or values that you want the consumer to see? And you're kind of seeing that effect over the long term, only measuring every quarterly, for example, maybe every half year or even every year. And you're looking at media mix modeling maybe once a year to optimize your TV spend across what you're doing. When you move into kind of these DTC companies and e-commerce in particular, obviously conversion is getting someone to come to your site and buy your product. And there's a much shorter life cycle. And so the role of TV ends up having a dual purpose, which is all of those things I talked about with CPG. You want to build your brand, you want to drive favorability, you want to be measuring brand health over time and ensuring that you stay top of mind. But there's also an immediacy to it, because TV itself it's not a one-screen experience anymore, right? So you're looking not only at those longer term metrics, but like, are you driving traffic? There's a lot of measurement platforms there. You can see like that direct, like when your ad is on television or on some OTT, is someone interacting and going to your site? We're looking at direct traffic. We're looking at organic search to see if like we're actually getting a kind of real-time view on the impact of something that would be more traditionally long-term. And then there is this blend of it driving direct response. For us at ThirdLove, we have a campaign in the marketplace right now that's really great called Your Boobs Deserve Third Love. It's really funny and is very different for the marketplace. And what we saw after we launched that campaign, which was we did not set out to drive sales with it. That's always kind of the nice icing on the cake. But we saw a really strong halo effect of efficiency on our performance marketing spend. So all of a sudden, all of the performance dollars that we're putting out there are working that much harder for us, and we're driving sales that way. And so, I think that's I guess a kind of long answer to say that like the arc and the purpose and the different ways that you can use TV in particular when it comes to an e-commerce brand, I think is much richer and much more complicated in some ways, because there's like ways that you can track and measure immediately and potentially like pivot your tactics or tools in a much quicker way than I ever would have done, say, at a Coca-Cola when I'm planning into, our partnership spend with the Olympics on Powerade.
Got it. And when you're at ThirdLove, when you're planning TV campaigns, and you mentioned that it kind of plays a role within the overall marketing spend, are you planning that completely independent of the performance-based campaigns, or is it all integrated as far as one overarching strategy where TV is going to play this particular role within the funnel, so to speak, and then we're going to amplify it through other channels that might be more of a direct response type of role?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. It's the latter, but that's more recent. ThirdLove is it's a startup still, and it's one of it was the pioneer in the industry, right? It kind of broke the mold on what bras could be, and went up against the behemoth of Victoria's Secret. And I'd say in the television that ThirdLove had done in the past, it had been viewed a little bit more as a tactic. Like, how can we leverage this channel to drive brand awareness, to drive some returns, and also using TV as a direct response tool. However, now, and particularly with this Your Boobs Deserve Third Love campaign, it is a part of holistic planning in which we had a series of KPIs and a series of what we were trying to achieve, where TV played that large scale, broad reach role, but we supplemented it with content, creative messaging that all laddered back into this like holistic 360 campaign, but in channels and with vehicles and assets that were much more direct response, that referenced our 20% off new customer discount, or our 30% bundling discount that you get, where there was that call to action, or whether the creative actually was much more performance driven. And I think that that's what led to the strong gains that we saw when we were on, like March was when we were on TV the most, with our highest GRPs. And that the sync up of that was that, as I mentioned before, that kind of coherent customer journey to make the campaign more effective. And I think that that's a learning that I will be taking forward into however we use however we have a larger brand campaign. But I do think, to your point, there are ways that TV can stand alone outside of a campaign to act in some kind of an always on capacity too. So it's like, we like to think about an ignite, build, sustain model at ThirdLove, and that sustained time period. Maybe you're not running a major campaign and your TV doesn't tie back holistically to every single piece of content and creative you have in the marketplace, but it allows enough of that that always on message around what your brand is to maintain interest at a level that allows you to get to kind of like the next big fully integrated touch point.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. And so you mentioned a few times TV driving direct response, which I think a lot of people would maybe be surprised at, thinking, well, how does that work? So I'm curious, just tactically, when you guys are planning TV and thinking, okay, we are going to kind of leverage this to some extent as a direct response vehicle, how do you go about executing that?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think that, this is what you see as the rise of DTCs playing in TV, right? And it goes back to that point that I made that TV viewing right now is not a one-screen experience. And it's almost like, if we wanted to have an existential conversation, what is TV? Like, what is TV? Today, even like TV, I watch YouTube TV on my TV. That's my cable, but that's a streaming platform. But, and so with all of these lines blurring, there is a much more, there is a stronger and clear ability for DTC brands to use strong CTAs to drive traffic and interest in redeeming that. So whether that be an offer and ensuring that you have a strong offer at your end card or integrated into the ad itself. So one of the things we did with Your Boobs Deserve Third Love is that we created it off of a long form piece of content that we were able to launch online that included the CTAs in the creative itself to make it engaging and interesting, and that consumers would want to respond to it in that way. And then you can use platforms to obviously tie back to the time that those specific ads aired and understand where those codes redeemed. What are we seeing in sales during those particular ads so that you can measure the effectiveness in it? So, I think that that's what we think about it in that way. It's what is the mix of the platforms between traditional linear TV and OTT streaming TV? Yeah. Understand that people are going to be to screening, and what are the creative nods or tools that we can use beyond just your traditional end card to incentivize them to come and check you out and try sales.
Got it. Makes perfect sense. You kind of touched on the fact that, what is TV? Essentially, people are getting long form content over a variety of screens and, through linear, through connected TV devices. So when you guys are thinking about deploying media and leveraging, let's call it the large screen as TV, but through both linear and connected, how are you making decisions as far as where to place media, how big to go into linear, how big to go into connected TV, as just the world of, consumer behavior is just changing so quickly in terms of how they're actually getting their content?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think I saw a recent stat that linear TV has decreased in terms of time spent year over year for the last 3 years, or in terms of viewership as well. And what I think is really telling about that is that it either decreased or plateaued on those platforms, even during COVID, when everyone's at home with their TVs. And I think that that was a real big wake up stat to me, because I'm like, wow, okay, people are inside their homes and they're choosing other platforms, or they're using, like what you said, their big screen TV that's in their living room to stream something. The way that we view it, like at least for ThirdLove, we have a pretty broad target. So effectively, it could be any woman that wears a bra. But, when we think about our target, we do think about that she's likely 24 to 54, maybe a little bit higher household income. And at that point at which she's ready to graduate into something that's more quality. We know that linear TV still has the reach. Yeah. It still has reach that you can't get at levels that you can get through other streaming platforms. And the thing is that with streaming platforms, we're still kind of evolving and learning there. And there are platforms that are not ad supported. And those might be some with the greatest reach. And because you start to get a little bit more niche in terms of who's watching what, you're not necessarily getting that broad reach that you can get on TV, which a brand like ThirdLove benefits from, right? So we benefit from female-driven programming because we have a broader audience. Now, as you get to a smaller audience then, or a more niche product or target consumer, that's where broad reach TV doesn't work as well. So for us, that's like, we know that ThirdLove still has a ways to go with awareness, and linear TV is really about driving that top of mind awareness. Now, when it comes to streaming platforms and what we're considering there, there's a lot more about the contextual relevance we can do. And what I think is interesting, and what ThirdLove has gotten success in the past of doing, and we will continue to do going forward, is finding those opportunities that are not just run of show, or run of network, or not really run of network, but run of show with your with OTT, but integration opportunities that allow us to have a positive brand halo effect in terms of our brand equity, or knowing a little bit more about the mindset of the consumer that's going to reach it. So for example, we have now partnered 2 years in a row with Hulu to sponsor their Women's History Month, or Made by Her content during Women's History Month. That has been incredibly successful for us because it's aligned from a values perspective as us as a women-driven company, a female-founded company, to amplify that. But we also know that there's an interest from a female audience as well. And this year it actually proved incredibly successful for us because basically the day before Women's History Month and this Hulu platform launched was when Nomadland won the Golden Globe. So the next day, ThirdLove's brand name was next to Nomadland, and that was not just pretty cool, but it also served the platform.
Yeah, that's super interesting. That it sounds like you're viewing CTV and linear, CTV not just as kind of the new linear, right? But it's actually a different channel, and you're kind of different goals that you have through CTV maybe than linear. So are you then measuring the efficacy of each channel, CTV being a channel and linear being a channel, differently? Or do you kind of measure the success of your media the same way?
Yeah, so we do measure. I'd say that we're on a journey. I like to say, wherever we're on a journey. I think we're on a journey to measure it slightly differently. From a TV perspective, I mean, we're looking at NTA modeling and that kind of stuff, we're in the process of that. But like from a TV perspective, going back to that reach thing, it is those, like, are we really breaking through with those true top of funnel brand health metrics? Like, let's not look at them more than 4 times a year. Like, it takes a lot to move the needle there. Like, are we really gaining an unaided awareness, which quite frankly, that's where we need to go. When you're thinking about streaming, OTT, CTV, et cetera, there is an opportunity to look at engagement more. There is an opportunity to look at, like, are we driving traffic more, understanding that viewing might be happening on different platforms. Someone might be on their phone, on their iPad, et cetera, on their laptop, and there is a little bit more of a direct response component there. I can say that even from, and where kind of the future is going, which I'm excited about, is that when I was at Bonobos, we had run through Hulu and leveraged their Brightline platform where there's actually lead gen involved in it. And, I don't think we've cracked the nut yet there. But I think that is the future and the opportunity for streaming, because we don't know what's going to come up. Like, 10 years ago, if you asked us, is this where we would be? No one would have known. So we don't know where we're going to be in 10 years or so, but at least from trends, it is going to trend more and more to these personal devices, these personalized experiences that you can have. And I think that that's something that you can truly unlock through the streaming platforms that you can't do with linear TV.
Right.
It's just it's always going to be some kind of broad reach vehicle.
Right. And then in terms of the streaming platforms, I guess, how are you guys thinking about integrating campaigns on the streaming side with, call it, classic digital, right? So other types of digital marketing, where you might have the same type of ability to target particular audiences that you do on the CTV side. I'm curious if that's completely integrated, or if you're viewing CTV marketing kind of bucketed a little bit more with linear and not as integrated with other digital type marketing?
Yeah, so I would say that for us right now, at this moment, we'll talk about now and then we'll talk about the future. Right now, because that's what we're talking about, right? So right now, we are thinking about it bucketed a little bit more with the traditional TV and how do the two complement each other. But that's also because I would say that ThirdLove is still on a journey with expanding into other digital platforms like display, the programmatic, et cetera. Where I think the unlock is, and I know we touched on this when we chatted in our prep a little bit, is that there are so many platforms now which have linear components like NBC Universal and then Hulu. And then you've got the Paramount Plus going on. And that's going to just continue. And I think that those are publishers and places that do not just exist with a linear component and a streaming component, but they also have strong digital component. And what we are in talks to do, and I don't think that at least from my experience yet, that the networks and companies have truly unlocked the potential for integrating all of those pieces together. Because going back to what we were saying about engagement is that I truly think that like offering insurgent or interesting ways that you're integrating into like a TV, like that the future is that I don't want to just buy like a 15, 30-second ad. I want to understand how it can weave throughout all of these components so that consumer that is interacting with those platforms and all their different devices has different touch points and an interesting and memorable experience with our brand throughout each of them. And like I said, we haven't gotten there yet because we've had a couple of talks with some of those platforms and that's what we want to do. But I truly think that that's going to be the unlock in the future, especially as you're seeing more and more places, more and more linear, traditionally linear companies and platforms entering into the streaming space.
Yeah. Are there any brands or companies out there right now that you guys are looking at where you think that they're doing it particularly well as far as integrating CTV, linear with digital kind of in a holistic?
Oh gosh. Yeah, you're putting me on the spot there. I actually don't. Nothing comes to mind. Now you're going to make me want to go and like look up a bunch of stuff after this. Nothing really comes to mind because I don't think that the nut has been cracked yet. And maybe it has. And I'm going to put that out to anyone that's listening. If there's something that comes to mind where you think that they're doing it really well, let me know because we'd love to learn from it.
Got it. Yeah, oh, great. Well, I know we're coming up on time here a little bit, I think. How about the future? I guess, at this point, obviously, people's consumption of media is changing so rapidly as far as the type of device and the ability to time shift content, and makes it just incredibly complex from a marketer's perspective. What are your thoughts in terms of where you see this going in the future? Any, broad trends you think will continue, or trends right now that you think might somehow go in a different direction?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Well, I don't think the trend of linear TV tapering off is going to change anytime soon. I think that in the near term, it's probably going to accelerate as vaccinations increase and people are getting excited about, I don't know about you, but I have tons of summer plans for the first time in a year. And as people get out of the door, I don't think that media consumption is going to take a massive hit. I think that people are used to consuming now at a pace. I saw like some stat that said that with two screen consumption, it's actually a 31-hour day now in terms of like, it's crazy. But and we all need to step away from our screens. But so anyways, I do think that like the trend for traditional linear TV is going to continue to decelerate. I would say there's a couple of things. So I think that, one of them is, and we chatted about this before, this idea of shifting to engagement versus just impressions. Like, what is an impression? You can't really guarantee that those eyeballs are looking at your ad. And I get like, millions of impressions, billions of impressions. I'm like, what does that really mean? I mean, if no one actually looks at it, or if someone's reading their phone while your ad is playing. So how are you measuring engagement? And how are you creating content that's engaging, that feels like additive to someone's day and experience, versus detracting or an interruption. So I think that that's going to be really important, and brands will shift the way that they measure as well as the way that they create content to meet that. And I think that goes back to a little bit of like cracking the nut on the integration piece and feeling like bigger than it is as opposed to just a traditional media buy. I think that personalization will continue to become important, and it will be interesting. This is maybe future casting a lot. It will be interesting to see if linear TV and networks can figure out the personalization piece more. Because I do think that, like, I was actually thinking of iOS 14 in prepping for this, and how that's, privacy, and that's making some things more difficult. And maybe this is just because I'm a marketer, but I'm like, I actually like the ads that I get served, because especially in some digital platforms, they're getting much more relevant to me.
Yeah.
And so I do think personalization is going to become a little bit more important. But to that point, with the privacy piece and some digital platforms that have been traditionally so reliable, potentially becoming unstable or less reliable, there might be more of a push for like cracking some of that nut, particularly in the streaming space. And then the final piece I'll say, and this is again, like, maybe it's not in the too distant future, but I don't own an Oculus, but I experienced one for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and it was obviously like pretty incredible. And Oculus, that technology is now much too expensive, I'd say, for the mass market. However, that was also what TV was a long time ago, and it's not, that expensive when you compare it to a very nice television. And so I, in hearing some of my friends thinking about different use cases for that kind of technology, like working out, et cetera, I could see that like that becomes new technology and entertainment for the future. And if advertisers can figure out how to get in there early, it could unlock the personalization, it could unlock the engagement, and and just a whole new way of doing this. So those are my predictions.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it could be a completely new medium for telling stories, right? I guess from a marketer's perspective, it's all about telling a brand story out to the market, and through different ways. And mentioning engagement, and so that's certainly something we're thinking a lot about here at TVision, right? It's kind of the thesis for our company around an impression's not valuable if nobody's in the room and if they're not paying attention to the actual screen itself. So that's something that we work with marketers a lot in terms of diving in and truly measuring engagement with content. In terms of, I guess you mentioned a little bit around targeting. So we actually have a few more minutes than I originally thought, so we can dive in a couple more questions. So you mentioned kind of getting to particular consumer segments. So how do you balance that both on the goal of kind of general brand awareness for your brand with kind of micro targeting down to particular segments that are of most, that are most applicable to you guys? Because how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think from as it relates to TV and OTT, as I mentioned before, at least for ThirdLove, and even for when I was at Bonobos before, we were thinking about, not necessarily a pretty broad target, right? And so when we're drilling down into specific segments for those higher upper funnel metrics, there isn't a lot of necessarily slicing and dicing as it relates to that. However, I think what is interesting for ThirdLove, and thinking back to the Bonobos and like brands that are multi-category brands in particular, I think when you think about the opportunity with TV, and particularly with streaming platforms and other kind of like new to the market TV platforms, affinity interests and being able to reach audiences that align with that, depending on the content that you're running alongside, becomes important. So, I think for us, it's not, we know, for example, that our woman is into interior decorating, and we know that she's into like home decor and gardening and that kind of thing. And so how are we looking for content that we can align with her in that way, whether it be at the broad perspective, like HGTV, or whether it actually be kind of run of shows specific shows that align with those affinity interests. And particularly as we think about like new categories like loungewear, is there a space and a place that we would amplify that? I think for us, to be honest, we found more success with that more targeted consumer focus and segmentation focus in places like YouTube, which, you go back to like, what is TV, where we started. YouTube has to be considered as part of TV too. Like when we think about YouTube, we're thinking about YouTube on, are we like, what is our brand lift looking like? And it's also that kind of hybrid of like, are we able to drive traffic from it as well? And you can absolutely use YouTube as a DR perspective. So for us, it's much more about that
different. Is the creative different for say a YouTube or connected TV campaigns where you're kind of micro targeting versus something more general or linear? Are you actually repurposing different creative and different channels?
Yeah, so yes and no. I think that when you're looking at channels like YouTube, where we are getting a little bit more affinity interest targeted, we absolutely are adapting the creative for what that affinity interest is and what that consumer segment is. Less so in streaming and definitely not in TV, because because it's still, or linear TV, it's still such a broad reach vehicle.
Got it. Great. We've had some questions come in throughout our chat, so maybe now's a good time to kind of go to some of these questions.
Cool.
Let's see here. So one question was, how do you see media partnerships, especially in TV, evolving over the next year or so?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think I'll go back to my answer about the linear streaming digital integration. Is that something that I think will, over the next year is a short period of time, but I do think that that's going to become really important, and people that can nail that and unlock it in the right way, or companies will win from it. I think the other thing where there is a lot of opportunity if you get it right is, and comes back to being authentic and meaningful and like giving someone something that keeps attention and makes sense, is show integrations. So this isn't necessarily like your traditional media buy, but I'll give you an example from Bonobos. We got in really early. It predated me, so I can't take credit for it. But we got in really early with the relaunch of Queer Eye for The Straight Guy, and integrated into one of those episodes in a way that was like meaningful to the content, meaningful to the brand, etc. And we not only saw a big impact on brand awareness there, but we also had people coming into our Bonobos guide shops, which are our stores, saying, "Hey, I saw you on Queer Eye. You're awesome. I want to try you." So there was actually a little bit of like a direct response component to it. And I think that kind of innovative way that you are being meaningful in something that someone's already engaged in, versus just tucking at them, will become more important. And if you could do that in the next year, that's pretty cool.
Are you guys now at ThirdLove looking at doing those types of brand integrations, directly into shows?
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. Another question was around striking deals with media conglomerates. So, a lot of these media conglomerates now might have a CTV platform as well as classic linear assets. And the question was specifically, how do flexibility and fluidity impact how you approach deals with media conglomerates?
Yeah, so I'm going to read between the lines on that and maybe interpret a little bit, which is, I'll say what it means to ThirdLove. Like ThirdLove is still a startup, and we are not, like, it's funny when you say the media conglomerates, I'm thinking back to my Coke days where we just like do massive buys with like, I keep referencing the Olympics, but like we were locked into the Olympics every year because we just had a big deal with NBC and the US Olympic Committee. So that's just what you did. And when you're at a DTC the size of ThirdLove, like you're not having those conversations. And in fact, you are, because you want to be nimble, you're constantly thinking about, should I be locking into planned media that is like pre-bought and non-cancelable versus cancelable media? And I can absolutely say that is a tension within this company. That's a healthy tension. So at least how we approach it from ThirdLove's perspective is, what are the big bets we want to take? And maybe we take one of them or two of them going into, like, we're going to do a brand campaign, so we're going to lock that in. And, for us, that was Hulu. I mean, that's not like, at I think the scale that you're talking about, or this question was talking about, but for us, that was like the Hulu Women's History Month. We have a couple of conversations that are ongoing about big integrations for the fall, with new shows that are coming up. That's kind of where we take our bets. But as it relates to larger network buys, we kind of try and find that blend of like, okay, we're going to lock in the non-cancelable for, the Bravos of the world that we really want to make sure that we're on, because we know that she's there. Yeah. And then look for things like either scatter or cancelable media for other partners.
Another question here was around emerging media channels, right? So there's obviously more, channels emerging out there, different networks, both CTV and on the linear side. How do you approach these emerging media channels, and how do they factor into your overall strategy?
Yeah, so we always want to be exploring emerging media channels. For us at ThirdLove, it's about finding the balance of testing into things that are new, but understanding the capabilities on their targeting and the return on investment. So, I know this isn't related specifically to TV, but like thinking about TikTok, for example, TikTok is obviously like not a new emerging channel, but kind of still an emerging channel. Like they still have some limitations with how you target and that kind of thing. And when you're talking about a brand that's like basically 100% targeted at women, that's a consideration with how we think about spending our time and our money on doing something like that, versus either something more traditional or another emerging channel where we actually might be able to test a test return on a shorter time horizon. So that's kind of a very specific answer, but on aggregate, we really take the like very, tried and true 80-20 approach, where 80% of our buys are within, what we know has worked for us in the past, or we know has worked for someone else in the past. And then 20% of our buy is something that's entirely new. Like this isn't really emerging either, but like we did a big integration with Bustle and Romper for the Your Boobs Deserve ThirdLove campaign. And quite frankly, we had never really done those digital partnerships before. And also testing into things like YouTube, the creators, brand creators, like influencer content, et cetera. We think about like, how are we balancing that mix? Do we have enough that's really going to like drive the results that we want no matter what, because we know it's tried and true? But like, let's take 20% of that and like thoughtfully throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and see what sticks.
Yep, see what works. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. The next question is a bit more tactical, and it has to do with under delivery. So do you value linear and digital delivery at an equal level? And do you allow linear under delivery to be made good on digital? And if so, is there some type of limit around the amount that can be made good in that way?
It's interesting. So, we've only run one campaign since I've been at ThirdLove, so I can like be completely honest about that. And also, at Bonobos, we've been in a lucky situation where we haven't under-delivered from our linear perspective and been in the place where we need to make it up with digital. But I do think, going back to what we talked about before with everything being interconnected and you can't necessarily look at channels in a silo, that there is the ability to make that up in digital. I think that where it's not apples to apples is going back to kind of that sheer reach perspective, is like, are you able to truly get the same kind of reach out of digital, and because it's a different kind of engagement than you did in linear. But long answer short, yes, I do think that there's flexibility because everything is integrated. But luckily, in my short history of ThirdLove and what I experienced at Bonobos, we weren't.
Yeah, and on the CTV side, I'd imagine the answer is definitely yes, right? I mean,
yes,
many would call CTV digital, right? Is it digital? Is it TV? I mean, who knows what the classification is.
Yes, I would say that. But I will say that the consumption habits and occasions and ways that people are interacting with and consuming media between CTV and digital are slightly different. So you just have to take those differences into account as well.
Got it. Here's a good question. Has the COVID crisis forced any modifications or changes to your short-term and long-term strategy at ThirdLove?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I can actually speak to kind of what went on before I got to ThirdLove. So yeah, I think that during COVID, there was a huge opportunity to drive efficiency with digital channels. And really there was just an industry-wide pivot to let's focus on performance marketing and how are we driving that sale? Because consumers, at least at the beginning, weren't necessarily in the mindset to like, be buying bras or thinking about pants. And when they were there and you could serve them up an ad that they felt relevant, you could convert them at a much lower cost. And I can speak to both Bonobos and ThirdLove. That was a pivot that we took at both of those. What has changed over time, and as the pandemic has gone on, and you've seen a lot of engagement, particularly within the intimates and essentials industry, and the kind of proliferation of options here, is that brand building is becoming more important again. And so, while during COVID there was this kind of shift to like, how can we drive performance and capture the low-hanging fruit of spending our media dollars in digital channels where a lot of advertisers had pulled out of. Now everybody's starting to shout again and has done that like since the beginning of the year, end of last year in a lot of ways. And so that's why we're pivoting. That's why we're having this conversation right now, because we're investing in brand again to ensure that we're top of mind as consumer confidence rises, as people have more money to spend, as hopefully people get back to work. So that's kind of the arc of what we've experienced. But I will say that the efficiency that we were able to experience over COVID, it's something that we're balancing the brand and the efficiency in, I think, a better place as a result now.
Got it. That's great. Well, why don't we close out on this one? I guess last question. So I mean, there's been such a proliferation of so many D2C brands coming to market, and so I guess at the end of the day, how do you ensure that ThirdLove can stand out from the clutter of just so many brands kind of being launched to market? What are some of the, I guess, keys that you would tell the audience out there for any brand, and particularly how they can leverage TV to do this, to stand out clutter?
Yeah, so that's a good question to close on, because it's definitely something I think about every day. When I think about ThirdLove, as I mentioned, it launched as a pioneer in the industry, and now the proliferation of Me Too's and in the category is crazy. I think it was like there's 20% increase in competition. I just saw that stat year over year, like
wow,
nuts. So what we can do, I think it's all about how you can be unexpected, how you can show up and be unexpected to punch above your weight. So for ThirdLove, I know we didn't talk a lot about Bonobos, but like for Bonobos, like the most successful campaign that Bonobos had over the arc of when I was there, and I think that predated it, was our Evolve the Definition campaign, which didn't even talk about, that Bonobos sold menswear, but talked about what the definition of masculinity was. And the media buy was an insurgent media buy where we ran a 90-second ad at the start of the ESPYs, arguably the most masculine event of the year, and really broke through in that way to be unexpected and like get people to stand up. And from a ThirdLove perspective, we're really thinking about how can we stand out with our messaging? So the whole Your Boobs Deserve ThirdLove campaign, it was very tongue-in-cheek, lots of fun puns about boobs, very authentic and relatable, and in a way that you won't see like a Victoria's Secrets ad that's like all perfect models, or some of these other brands that are like kind of become all table stakes just about inclusivity and women's empowerment. Like, how can we use humor as a tool to break out? So that's where you can kind of engage your consumers. And that's what I'll leave it on, because I think Emily's here to say we're done.
It's a great ending.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. That was obviously a great note to end on. I'm a huge fan of ThirdLove, and I feel like they stood out to me with, all of the half size inclusivity and just, the campaigns, you see such a wide variety of, people represented, which you did not historically see in some traditional, lingerie brands. So, so great to have you here and hear your insights on the future of, TV and this space. And thank you so much, Mike, for being such a great moderator.
Thank you, Emily, for the time. And Colleen, thank you so much for the conversation today. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Emily. And thank everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Hope to have you guys again soon. Well, huge thanks to Colleen and Mike for kicking off our program today. We so